Well, meet Tatiana Straathoff. She's a professional circus artist and keynote speaker, and she inspires countless professionals, athletes, and students to discover their strength, courage, and unique resources within to transform obstacles into opportunities. I'm going to let Tatiana tell you a little more about what she does in a moment here, but what inspired me to have this conversation with her is her incredible story of overcoming. And I met her not that long ago, and I just knew that we had to have this conversation. So, welcome, Tatiana.
Thank you so much, Kim. I'm thrilled and honored to be on your podcast today.
Just tell us a little bit about you, anything that I missed in the intro.
Yes, well, I think you managed to capture everything in terms of what I'm doing now and also where I came from in the past with the circus, which I'm sure we're going to chat about next and how I got into that.
Absolutely. Yes, we are definitely going to dive into that. I wanted to start there actually and talk a little bit about your background and how you decided to join the circus. Like I said, I've never chatted with anybody who has gone this route, and I find it really fascinating. So maybe you could just dive in and talk to us about what led you to that decision.
Yes, I also didn't know anybody at the time who had run away with the circus. And that was the question I asked myself when I was about probably 12 or 13 years old. How does one run away with the circus? And for
Mm,
me, it all started with one evening. My parents took me to see my very first circus show. And I remember sitting in the seats. I was completely in awe of what the human body was capable of doing. For the first time in my life, I really began to believe that anything was possible, that the
mhm.
body and the mind were truly limitless. And that night started a big dream for me. And at the time, the dream did not seem tangible in any sort of way. I had no background in circus, in acrobatics, no dance or gymnastics training, but I really fell in love with what I was seeing on stage and this magical world. And I knew that that was the path that I had to follow, no matter how difficult or challenging it was going to be.
Okay, so the seed was planted when you were about 11, 12 years old, and that I'm going to assume just kind of kept growing over the next few years. And so
Yes.
what took you to that day? What how old were you and how did you actually enter the circus?
Well, about a few years in, I learned about the National Circus School in Montreal. It's the top circus school in the world, and it's located right beside the Cirque du Soleil headquarters. And
Oh,
I learned that every year they accept about 21 to 27 students from around the world. They first have everybody send in applications, and from those applications, they choose a few hundred to come to audition in Montreal or in a few other locations around the world. Montreal is just the biggest one. And so, of course, I chose Montreal knowing that'd be the most challenging, but I felt that I needed to be there. And
yeah.
that was what I set my sights on accomplishing, getting to that audition. And I really didn't look past that at the time. I had no backup plan. And it was very
Mhm.
possible that I wouldn't be chosen, I wouldn't get into school, but I never entertained those thoughts, not because I was so confident that I would get in, but because in my mind I felt that there was no other possible path for me. And I
So you were
was
laser
using,
focused on this.
yes, yes, very much. And that's what kept me training and having the determination. Every day I would get up before school in the morning and after school as well. I would train. Before the audition, I was probably training about 5 hours a day. And a lot of those
Wow.
hours were by myself. I'd seek out whatever resources I could. And I was so fortunate in Calgary to find a few people who were willing to help me and give me strength or flexibility advice. And,
Mhm.
but a lot of the training was at home. So I had pictures on my wall and this audition and the people that I had seen who had graduated from there and gone off to have incredible career in the circus.
Okay, so you get accepted and you start training. I can imagine the feeling of when you were accepted into this program What was that like when you started to train and you were seeing your dream coming to pass here?
It was a lot of mixed feelings. Every single day, I was so excited to be living my dream. And at the same time, I was incredibly homesick. And
Mm,
the amount of pressure, physically, mentally, and emotionally, every single day felt so daunting. I had to keep reminding myself this is what I wanted to do. And I
yeah.
think there are a lot of things that people wouldn't necessarily imagine just outside of the training. For example, living by myself for the first time, I just turned 18 and handling all those changes, learning a new language. My coaches mainly spoke in Russian or French to me. So I was having to
Okay.
figure out how to communicate with them. And then I had
Mhm.
all kinds of issues with injuries and with body image issues and weight and figuring out how to eat for having the best energy. So there are a lot of things that I was handling in addition to training and
Mm.
having to be at this top level every day, having to push the limits to see what I could accomplish during those 4 years there.
Yeah, and it sounds like, I mean, even though you were walking in the plans that you knew you wanted to be in and the vision that you had for your life, there was difficulty. There was struggle to get there. It's not always an easy path when you even though you know you're on the right path for your life. And I know when we talked before, I think you called yourself a perfectionist in everything that you were doing. So I think how much of the pressure was you putting it on yourself?
Absolutely. And I didn't realize that at the time. It wasn't until some years later that I realized I'd never be able to escape that pressure because it was coming from myself. And
Hmm.
I didn't know at the time. I thought it was coming from where I was training and the environment surrounding me. We all put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be the best. And when you're performing almost every day or twice a day at a really an Olympic level, then you do need to have the pressure and the kind of schedule, the regiment each day to stay at that level and to stay as injury free as possible.
I can't imagine what kind of pressure that you were putting on yourself, plus what was coming externally. That's a lot, especially for your age. And what I understood is that you were preparing for a dream job coming up in Europe. Is that correct?
Yes, and all of us in my program, so there were 27 students from around the world, every single country you can imagine. Out of that 27, there were 8 females, and I was one of them. So we were a very tight-knit group, and all of us, upon graduation, we all had jobs in different parts of the world. And this was what we were all looking forward to see our hard work pay off and be
Mm.
able to enjoy life a little bit more, and especially the performance aspect. For me, I had a dream job in Europe, traveling with a very traditional circus. So by caravan, um,
Wow.
each artist would have their own caravan. And these are the images that were conjured in my mind when I first dreamed of the circus. And everything was modernizing so quickly. And so the fact for me to have this job coming right out of school and to go into something that felt like really the roots of circus, that was very exciting for me. But of course, as we often know, life doesn't go according to our plans that we've set out.
No, we make our plans, don't we? And
We
and
sure
then
do.
life gets in the way, and that was the case for you. So let's fast forward now to 2015. Your life completely changed, probably in ways that you never ever dreamed of. You became bedridden, and I want you to take us to that time because that was, I mean, unimaginably difficult. And I want you to just kind of walk us through what happened.
Well, we'll start 2015. I was getting all packed up. My parents had helped me empty my apartment, and I was preparing to fly the next day. So we're 24 hours away from me starting this new life and dream job. And I was diagnosed with a very rare bone disease. I'd never heard of it before. And At the time, the doctors didn't know if I'd ever be able to do what I was doing, what I had trained so hard to do. And my specialty was hand balancing. So I was on my hands for hours each day. And we didn't know at the time what kind of use I would have again in my right hand. I was in shock for a lot of this. I had never
Well, you were
taken
just
more than,
preparing to fly. You
uh,
were literally didn't get on the plane, clearly.
no,
You stayed behind. So this is all within 24 hours of you
yes.
flying to your dream job.
Yes, and very quickly we had to make some new plans in the interim, and the goal was always that I'd rejoin the tour in about 6 weeks. And of course, looking back now, I needed to believe that it was only going to be 6 weeks,
Oh.
which again back then I thought, well, I'm going to be terribly out of shape, and it's going to take so much training after missing those 6 weeks to be able to perform at that level again and be part of the show. But that gave me hope as I was undergoing treatments for this condition. And 6 weeks passed, and then 6 months. I was still unable to use my hand, but things were progressing. We could see from the scans that the bone was healing. It was just taking a lot
Mm-hmm.
longer. But as I was undergoing treatments for the bone disease, everything else in my body started to break down. It got to the point eventually a few years later where, as you said before, I was completely bedridden. I was sensitive to light, so I had to be in a dark room all the time. I was sensitive to sound, any kinds of loud noises, even people around me talking. We needed to whisper, otherwise it'd be too
Mm.
jolting.
Wow.
Touch, I was sensitive to, and then almost every kind of food. I was so limited in terms of what I could eat. So my world gradually became smaller and smaller until I was in this very dire state.
What did the doctors say at that time? Did they have any idea what was happening?
All kinds of things, and yet no concrete answer. And I'm
Mm.
so grateful for all the doctors that tried their best.
Yeah.
We did every kind of test you can imagine in Canada as well as in Europe. Any test that we thought could give us answers
Mm-hmm.
into what was going on, and we had some ideas. My parents were researching all the time, and my mom had studied holistic nutrition. So in terms of the food and the diet, that the nutrition side, I was getting the best help that I could get. And I
Mm.
think that did help tremendously, but there were so many puzzle pieces that were missing. And
Yeah.
a lot of doctors, even once we were able to come to any sort of diagnosis, they then said, I don't know what the treatment will look like or if there's any treatment for you. And that was so
I can't.
challenging because
Oh,
for all these years we were looking for a why and a what. And then
yeah.
once we got there, realizing that there wasn't really anything past that, and we needed to search so much deeper until we could find people that had some answers and some experience with what I was going
Mm.
through.
Okay, so a word sticks out. You said years. So we're now not 6 weeks. We're not 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
We're now into years. So just to put perspective here, to think about you stopping training completely and life came to a screeching halt within 24 hours. I'm trying to picture what that must have been like for you. And I'm sure I have no idea. But I would imagine you had so many fears. You don't know what your future looks like anymore. You had all these plans, you had done all this work and all this training. You had this vision from a young girl that you were fulfilling, and now everything just kind of went away. How did you face your fears? I'm assuming they were probably staring at you in the face. How did you handle that?
I think a lot of these fears came to me already at an early age when I look back now already as a young girl and grew as I got older. And it wasn't until my circus years that really intensified those fears. And I was so
Interesting.
busy all the time that there wasn't really a moment to address them. And even when everything was happening, when I had this diagnosis, still trying to stay as busy as I could. And I was trying to train on my other arm. I was trying to do everything that I could to keep going. And it eventually got to the point where I was bedridden. That's when I had to face everything because I
Yeah.
couldn't tolerate much company or visiting time. So even the amount of time that my parents or my fiance could spend in the room with me was very
Mhm.
limited. I couldn't listen to music. It was too loud. And so I was alone with my thoughts for hours and hours in the day. And as incredibly challenging and scary as that was, it was the best thing that could have happened to me. And once I was able to start to accept the situation that I was in and to realize that it was not going to go away, that I needed
Mm.
to face the demons, the insecurities, and everything that I perceived as a failure in my life. Those times and those revelations were so important to me and continue to be important as I reflect back, as I'm moving forward. And I don't
Yeah.
know if I ever would have been able to do that had I not been forced to be completely still.
I think what you said about being in your own head, your own thoughts, you couldn't listen to music, you couldn't really have conversations very well at that point in time. And to be forced into that is, I think, most people's worst nightmare. How much of your identity do you think was tied up in your performance and tied up in what you were doing?
I
What do you
think
think?
100% of it was tied up in my identity as a circus
Mm,
artist, as a performer, as somebody who had always been active. That was probably one of the hardest parts, and I know a lot of people have struggled with this when they've had to face a challenge
yeah.
that turned their life upside down, or as I say for me, right side up, because my life was upside down before. And
Yes, it was.
um, but again, that was another blessing for
Mm,
me because I think to live your life, to live your whole life basing your self-worth and who you are as a person, basing that on what you do each day instead of who
mhm.
you are inside, to me, being able to really accept who I am, that's Tatiana. The circus, everything else that I do, those are extras. But to really
Yeah.
know and accept who I am at its core and know that that's enough is such a gift moving forward and has really opened my life and my perspective up to so many possibilities. But in the
Oh,
moment, in the
yeah.
moment, so challenging to accept and have to work through what I would describe as layers and layers of these emotions and thoughts and beliefs.
Yeah, I relate to that. And I think this is a really important point as well, that many, many people think about, or maybe don't think about their identity and what it's wrapped up in. And in my opinion, it requires a constant check-in because for myself as well, working the jobs and the career that I had, I didn't think that my identity was tied up in these things. But when I lost my job, I found out how much it was. And until we're
Yes.
faced with loss and we're faced with some of these things being stripped away from us, do we truly understand how much of it actually had a hold on us, defining who we are? So as difficult as it is to get stripped down to just you, without the job, without the career, without anything else around you, and figure out and be okay with who you are, just you and nothing else. That in itself is so empowering because then it really doesn't matter in the big picture what happens in life. I mean, it matters, but when crisis shows up, it feels like you're more equipped to handle it because you know who you are. That thing that you're tied to isn't necessarily going to define you going forward, and that if you need to shift gears, it's a little easier to do so. So
Yeah,
I
couldn't have
completely
said it
relate.
better, Kim. And
Well,
and who you are
yeah,
is your compass. And
yeah,
so as long as you're
absolutely.
staying true to your values and staying true to yourself, listening to your heart and to your body,
Yeah.
you're going to figure it out. And the path is going to be much more rewarding maybe not easier, probably not easier, than if you're following something else and perhaps a path that's set out for you, as so often can be with a career that you go into. There's this sort of a path that we imagine of things that we need to do or accomplish.
Yeah. The vision that you had for your life was being challenged. And I know your mom was one of the critical, wonderful people in your life. And you have a mom who stepped in and kind of almost pulled the vision along for you, I'm going to say. And you can correct me if that doesn't sound right,
Beautiful
but
way of putting it.
it just, when you told me how important your mom was at this stage of the game, I really saw her as somebody who was almost carrying the vision that you had for your life and fighting for it when you couldn't. So tell me a little bit how important it was to have somebody like your mom around you, and how important it was to have the right people around you speaking over you.
I really began to see everybody's gifts when I was ill, seeing what each person was able to bring. And that was so helpful because during this time, I did lose a lot of friends who were going on a different path than I was. And so to have my mom, my dad, my fiance, my brother, my grandparents, my aunt and uncle, having them
Mm-hmm.
around me and support me, even if they didn't necessarily know what was going on. I think outside of our house, nobody could quite understand just how bad it was because I was so cut off from the world. I wasn't able to be
Yeah.
on my phone very much as well. So I had a childhood best friend that would send messages to me through my mom, and my mom would read them to me. And I mean, I always tell people when they ask about my mom that if they think that I'm persistent and determined, then they have to see my mom because she's got this quiet, unbelievable strength that kept us
Mm.
all going, that kept our whole family together during this time. And I don't know how she did it. I don't think I'll ever fully understand or know, but
Moms
she
are
never,
incredible.
and you would know that better than anyone, Kim. And my mom never let me go to sleep without hope for the next day, and the kind
Mhm.
of energy that must have taken. And I think she had a lot of sleepless nights where she was trying to figure out what would be the next step.
Yeah.
And every day it felt like that hope was broken. We'd try a new treatment, and I tried to put everything into it, just as I've done for everything in my life. You put your whole heart and belief into it, and when that treatment would fail or send me backwards, my
Yeah.
mom was there saying, well, we're not going to give up. We're going to try something new. We're going to keep searching until we find it. And to have that support, I know that I'm extremely fortunate. I know that not everybody
Yes.
has that. And
Yeah.
what I've learned is it doesn't have to be a big circle or a big community. Sometimes it's having one best friend that never leaves your side, or
Mhm.
a mom or a fiance who was patient because he wasn't able to see me a lot during that time, and he was
Yeah.
patient. So everybody had their gifts and their role that they brought to my life during a very difficult time.
Yeah, you make so many great points, but one of them being that your circle doesn't have to be big, but having the right people, making
Mm-hmm.
sure that you just being focused on the goal, being focused on where you want to go. Because if you literally listen to the doctors every day and they're just doing their jobs, but if you listen to what they're saying every day and the grim outlook that they're painting, and to hear that and have so many failed treatments, oh my goodness, that has to be so challenging to keep going. But because, and I mean, this is how important vision is and how important having
Yes.
that focused goal at the end of the road is, because you kept, and your mom just kept on that and would not let that go. And I can't help but think how important that was in the process to have both of you in agreement. And even when you couldn't be hopeful, your mom took that role on, and just, it was like a dog with a bone almost, right? Wouldn't let
Hmm.
go. Just that tenacity to keep going. I can't imagine how much of a game changer that was, and how important that right community around you was. Not speaking a lot of negativity and a lot of doubt, but to keep that
Yes.
going forward. I can't imagine how important that was.
And the one other person in this, in everybody's community that has to be right there at the top is yourself. And I always
Yes.
thought that I believed in my dreams, but it wasn't until I was very ill and I was lying in bed one day and I realized how much I was fighting against myself and how much time and energy was spent having this dialogue of a very negative voice,
Mm,
telling me things and then me trying to move forward and realize that I couldn't have those thoughts if I wanted to heal. If whether you've got a big community or a small community, you have to be right there beside yourself. You have to be your friend and
yeah.
supporting, especially through a big challenge. You're not going to be able to get there otherwise. And I learned that.
Yeah, you're going to learn what's inside when you do face something, and maybe it doesn't have to be this big, but when you face something really, really challenging, you'll find out. It's like squeezing an orange. It might look nice and orange and beautiful and juicy on the outside, but when you squeeze it, you'll find out there might be something completely different on the inside. So that's something
That's
that
so true.
every one of us has to come to terms with and understand, is that inner dialogue. And what comes out of us when the pressure's on and when our feet are to the
Yes.
fire. And so that's
Yes.
another wonderful, wonderful gift that you ended up with through going through this challenge, is to adjust where you needed to adjust. So how did your perspective change in through all of this?
Changed in so many ways. When you talk about this orange, I think so much of us are so focused on our outer selves, and we're scared to sit with ourselves alone or to look inside. I understand that so well because I've been there as well, and it can be scary sometimes what we find. For me, it was realizing that I always had a smile and kindness for everybody else, but I didn't have that for myself. I was never going to be able to find that unless I was able to face some of those fears and reframe a lot of things that I thought were failures or that I had really beat myself up for. And in terms of perspective changing, it wasn't something that happened overnight. It was gradual. And I think that's why in my story, time is such an important aspect. I know that
Mm,
if I had healed within 6 weeks or even within the first few years, I would have gone back to exactly what I was doing before with the same mindset. There wouldn't have been transformation, which I know now that's what life is about. And I
yeah.
needed this length of time and to go through all these obstacles in order to gently nudge my perspective into changing everything that I thought to be true. And I think I was scared to do that because I thought this mindset, this way of thinking is how I made some of my dreams come to fruition. And if I
Hmm.
change that way of thinking, if I'm gentler, if I'm kinder to myself, how will I ever be able to do things moving forward and to be able to
Yeah.
accomplish what I want to do? And I've come to see that it's the exact opposite. And a lot of my treatments and my way forward in healing was gentler and kinder and softer. I love having that mindset going forward because it changes your life in every way and it's a much more joyful way of living.
Well, you've got a foundation now. And
Yes.
you could have, now it could have looked very differently. You could have gone off and been in the circus and had a very successful career, and it could have looked very different. But it went on a different path, and you ended up dealing with some of those very foundational things, and it brought you to the place you are today. And how do you feel like you've changed for the better? I know you just mentioned all those things, but how has this set your life up for success going through this?
Well, I often say when people ask me how I'm feeling, I'll say that I feel like a new person. I actually realized one day that it's not that I'm a new person. I think that I rediscovered myself.
Mm,
What was there all along, but all these layers on the outside were stripped away, and I've been able to accept
mm,
myself, and I'm finally letting myself be me. And so
yeah,
it's not this new person, it's what's been there all along. And we all have that, and we're all going to have different opportunities in our life to discover that. And whether we decide to act on those opportunities or even to see them as opportunities, they might not present themselves as this glowing gift. But if we take the time to really reflect and sit down with what's coming at us, I think there's that chance to do that.
absolutely. And that's exactly what you did. So it what looked like a terrible situation, and I think you spent 6 years, is what you said,
About
in
6.5 years,
6.5 years. That's
one
a long
one
time.
year completely in bed. So this is even just to give some context. Taking the few steps to the bathroom each day was not always possible. Brushing my teeth, I didn't always have the energy to do that. Some days I'd have the energy to write a line in my notebook or to read one page. So I had to use my actions, my words, and what I later on learned, my thoughts, very carefully, because that energy could be used up so fast. And if I were to push
Yeah.
past those limits, that could set me back weeks, even months. And so even lifting my head off the pillow each day, that was a lot of effort.
Yeah. So you found out you are enough, just Tatiana. That's a
Yes,
gift.
and I hope that everybody gets to that point sooner rather than later and realizes that.
Yeah. So what are your, if you're thinking about somebody listening into this conversation and maybe they're in a tough spot, or now they may not be bedridden, but maybe there's another challenge. Maybe they've just lost their job. Maybe they've had something very, very traumatic happen in their life that's really, really challenging them, and they don't see a lot of hope. What suggestions, or what can you say to this person that would give them some hope to move forward and not give up on what their vision is for their life?
I know it can be so difficult to hold on to hope. And like I said before, it takes, people don't realize the kind of energy that it takes to have hope each
Mm,
day.
mhm,
But I've learned to redefine my idea of hope. I've learned to see it. Hope is about possibilities. And so it's not focused on the outcome. And when we can take our focus away from the outcome, that's a really wonderful place to be because it allows our imagination to work. And so instead of saying, I'm working towards this and it needs to be this, it's saying there are a multitude of possibilities. And right now, I might not be able to see them all or to visualize myself being there. But if I can hold on to that hope and just be open, because every day there are possibilities and every action has a reaction. Every door that we open each day, we have a
mhm,
chance to move forward in some way. Even if sometimes it feels like we're moving backward, we don't realize that's
mhm.
part of the path. It isn't always moving forward.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I would say is how important it is to listen to your body and listen to your heart. Listen to your body was actually one of the very first phrases that I learned in French from a dear friend of mine, and it's j'écoute mon corps. I thought I understood what this meant, and being an athlete, we are seen as people who listen to our bodies. But I think so many of us don't truly listen because our minds are doing all the planning for us and
Mm,
saying, this is where we need our body to be.
right.
But the abundance of wisdom that's inside each of us. And it wasn't until I was completely bedridden and unable to be on my computer trying to, or in books, looking up the answers for myself, when I had to sit quietly and ask myself some of these questions and see what answers came up, that's when I realized how much of us how many of us are searching outside always when if we were to look within, I think we'd find a lot of the answers that we've been looking for. One last point that I would add to this is really being able to stay in the present moment. Again, not easy to do today. I know how difficult that can be, but when everything feels daunting and impossible, you need to be able to look at tiny steps and to take it a day at a time. And for me, and I think I can speak for my mom and a lot of my family in this, we actually had to take it even smaller than a day, so moments at a time. I had pain all over my body, and so there were days when I thought it felt like I wouldn't be able to make it to the
Mm,
next day having this pain. And when I could see it as, okay, I just need to get to the next hour or to when I can rest again, suddenly I felt like I can do this. And then one day became two and on and on and on. And that
yeah,
you have a tiny little voice that persistently will ask you, what if? And those are the possibilities. That's your imagination coming to place. And so
yeah.
listen to that voice more than the other voices.
What great suggestions. We are going to recap those in our show notes if you want to. If you want to re-listen to this or you want to read it in the show notes, we'll have some of those wonderful, wonderful suggestions and examples available to you. Tatiana, before we sign off here, what's on the horizon next for you? Like, what are you working on at the moment?
So many things. First of all, good health. We all
Mm,
take it for granted, or many of us, I should say, not all. And I wake up now each day just excited to put my feet on the ground and take the first few steps. And I'm
yeah,
never quite sure where the day will lead because I've kept this openness. So I have things that I'm working on. And as you mentioned at the beginning, I do presentations, inspirational presentations where I share my story and the journey that I've gone through in hopes of inspiring others. When I was ill,
mm,
I held on to stories of hope of people who had overcome what seemed impossible. And I feel that it's my turn now to give back in that way. So I go to businesses and schools and sport teams and events, and I'll share my story. And the keynote is called "Discover Your Extraordinary Possibilities," because everybody has those, and sometimes we just need encouragement to be able to bring them out
mm.
and to be able to see them. So I've been keeping busy with that. And then I'm so fortunate to also get to work with a number of ages. So on one side, I'm working with seniors with a program that I
Oh,
called Creating Your Sunshine. And you can take that in so many ways, but it's really focused on the mind and the body.
mhm.
We tend to have an idea about aging and that things are going to become so much more difficult. And if we can shift our perspective and see that there are things that we can do every day without equipment to keep ourselves strong, both in body and mind. And the focus is really working on balance to prevent falls in seniors, because I learned from my own grandparents how important that is to have the confidence each day to be independent, to be able to walk without worry of tripping. And of course, as you know,
Yeah.
coming from my background as a balance specialist on my hands, and then rediscovering and relearn balance on my feet and balance in my life. And then finally, I should say, last but not least, I work with athletes, and that's on their focus. A very difficult thing nowadays to be able to focus on one thing.
Yes.
But through all the different training and the modalities that I used when I was ill, I've learned to be able to focus. And I think that's so key, not just in athletics, but in our
Mhm.
life, and how to shift our mind and thoughts onto the right thing. And so working with them on focus, on their balance and their flexibility. And I'm excited to see where else this path leads. Every day, every week, there's something new, and I'll often say yes to it and see where it goes.
I love your story so much. And you're just such an example of resilience and redefining your vision when all seemed lost. And you are just on this amazing new path. So I'm very excited to watch you go forward and the things to come for you. So if you're looking for more, we will have some information on how to get in touch with Tatiana in our show notes and on the website, and also just some more links for resources if you're interested. So thank you again, Tatiana, for being here. And thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you
And
so much, Kim.
absolutely wonderful conversation. And we'll see you next time.